Hi guys, I am making this video to talk a little bit about the ideas presented in the week 4 discussion board, and I'm going to do it a little bit differently than I have in the past, just for the sake of time, because you guys know that I'm long-winded and I could talk for a really long time about all of these texts. So what I'm going to do is just kind of pick out the stuff that really stuck out to me. And that covers Gertrude Stein's reading, Hughes' reading, and then E. Cummings' text. So I want to start with Gertrude Stein and really the central question that just kept popping up from you guys, is just this repetition. So Sean asked about her repeating the phrase, "I write for myself and strangers." Joshua asked about repetition. Josh, I didn't even realize I have multiple Joshuas. Sorry, guys. The other Joshua asked about the word "it" used throughout the piece. So again, this concept of repetition, and let's see. We have several times Stein uses the phrase again, so repetition. Stein uses repetition several times, right? So you guys are really, really curious and interested in this concept of repetition. And I wanted to just highlight Ashton's response here because, Ashton, I think this is better than anything that I could ever come up with on my own. I mean, my goal here was to answer this question, and then I got to Ashton's response, and I was like, yeah, this is the answer. So let me read this and talk a little bit about it. Stein's use of repetition has value in a couple of distinct ways. At first, it stands out to me like the way an artist might use the strokes of a paintbrush, adding just a little more blue and a little more white to get the color of the sky just right. With her words, she is adding layers of light over the subject, drawing the reader into her point of view. Okay, so that's one option. And I really like this because, if we're thinking about modernism, and all of our modernist authors are writing about war and writing about America and writing about art. This is like a concept. So your metaphor here, Ashton, is gold. I mean, it's like, let's use art to talk about art. And so we have this repetition. Repetition draws the eye towards something, and that's essentially what's happening here, and that's totally right. But you don't stop there, right? You keep going. Another of the ways I see is that it is circular, if you will, and this use of circular language takes the reader to an almost altered state of mind. Writing usually has a more straightforward and logical progression, and in this way she hypnotizes the reader with repetitions, allowing the reader the opportunity to see as she sees for a moment the uniqueness of individuals and how that uniqueness pokes its head up from sameness and returns to the sea of repetition. So the way that I interpret this too, it's like Stein is complicated. Her writing is complicated. It is confusing. If she wrote one instance as opposed to repeating it over and over again, then we might not be able to dig into the complexity of her writing. So she repeats herself and she pulls us in, and yes, it is very hypnotizing in good and bad ways, right? And if I almost, like, when I read this, I almost wonder too, if she's repeating and focusing so heavily on repetition, maybe she's simultaneously arguing that people are essentially the same, which we can connect to all of our other authors, asking, like with Langston Hughes, asking for democracy and asking for freedom for African Americans that's different from, or the same as, white freedom and all of that. I think that maybe Stein here is talking about just we are the same. We are repeated over and over again. So why do some people get more than others? And then, Ashton, you say, which I think I love the most. A third way to view the repetitions is in the context of the industrial age. With this repetition, she also creates a rhythm and a feel of industrialization. The title is, after all, the making of Americans, right? Okay, so industrialization, creating, and, hammering out this like, when I read this, I hear this like repeated, maybe hammer on an anvil, like this sound over and over and over and over again, like this, just the wheels are turning and turning and turning, cycling back to the beginning and starting over and going through this like cyclical motion. And I think that it really, her writing might be really complicated, but it's very, very purposeful. And I think you've really hit on a lot of good points here. So Ashton gets like the gold star for talking about Gertrude Stein, because I think you've done it in a way that I couldn't even begin to touch on. So great job there. Okay, so the other thing that really stuck out to me was the discussion of Langston Hughes, and I think all of you guys are on the right track. Yes, his theme is freedom and his theme is democracy. And the question about the bread, why does he say, that he doesn't want, like, tomorrow's bread does him no good, right? Talking about the idea that, well, if he needs bread to survive, just like he needs freedom to survive, then he needs to survive today and not tomorrow, because if he doesn't have it today, he might not get it tomorrow. But I wanted to also pick up on, let's see, I think it's toward the end. Someone asked about the pronouns of Hughes' writing. Was this Langston Hughes? Hold on one second, y'all. Okay, it wasn't Hughes. It was Claude McKay's America, and Crystal asked, what do you think is the importance of McKay referring to America as a woman? Do you think she does this to show how strongly her love for it is for America? Quick side note, and a couple of people did this. Claude McKay is a man, not a woman. So I think you mean, do you think he does this to show how strongly his love is for America? But regardless, I think that this question is really interesting because, there's the obvious answer, I think, which connects to the obvious interpretation of McKay's poem, which would probably take on a Marxist approach. And that is, that in our representations of America, like, for example, the Statue of Liberty, we represent America as female, right? But I think you could also, and so the reason I want to talk about this is just if you were to take a poem not at face value and dig into it in a different way, then there would be nothing wrong with that. So, for example, you could take a more feminist approach here, and read McKay's work as a work of feminism. Now, like, there may be better interpretations, but you certainly could do it. And if you made a strong argument, then that would be fine. So, like, McKay says, although she feeds me bread of bitterness and sinks into my teeth her tiger's tooth. So in this instance, we've got, and I think somebody else wrote about this. We have like this mother figure, like Mother America, feeding, the act of feeding can be construed as very motherly. But then we also have sort of this like lioness. I mean, we use the word tiger, but this hate and angst, and that can possibly symbolize like female power. Even he says, giving me strength erect against her hate. So this America that he's characterizing as female he like simultaneously loves and hates. And I think somebody talked about that. There's this love-hate relationship here with the good and the bad things that McKay is, or the speaker of this poem, is finding in America. And so that almost suggests like this dual representation within the poem that women, so again, if you're going to read it as a feminist reading as opposed to some other type of reading, that women there are more sides to a woman than just like the ideal in the time, like this perfect woman who's not angry, who doesn't have this tiger side to her. So you could take a feminist approach to a text that might give you an interpretation of the poem that's not particularly obvious or not the go-to. And there's nothing wrong with that. So if you guys are thinking about your poems, or excuse me, your essays, I don't want you to think that like I'm looking for the right answer. I'm just looking for a very well supported answer. Okay, so then that brings me to the third and final thing that really stuck out to me as I was reading through as I was reading through your discussion board posts, and that's E. Cummings' text. And you guys had a lot of questions about this one. I think this is probably my favorite of all of them. I think that there are a lot of obvious and less obvious ideas here. And so I love everything that you guys are pointing out, but I also wanted to talk about a few other things. In my video when I introduced this text, I talked a little bit about the God, America, I in terms of the motto or the phrase or whatever you would call it, and that represents God first and then country and then self being the least important of those three things. And someone in this forum asked about capitalization. Why does Cummings only capitalize two words in his final line, the he and the word and? Why isn't, which gets me to like other questions, why aren't obviously or generally capitalized words that he's using, like God, America, and I, capitalized in his poem? He's certainly doing that on purpose. I think that he's trying to, what's the word? I can't think of the word. He's basically trying to say like this motto or this phrase is just maybe wrong. Maybe not. God is not the most important thing. America is not the most important thing. Maybe the self is, although he doesn't capitalize I either. So some other things that I want to talk about with this poem that you guys didn't quite get to, although Josie, you asked about them. Jingo, Gigosh, and Gum, and then Gory, you can add that as well. So Jingo means someone who's like a heavy supporter of policy of war. So anyone who really is like pro, yes, we should go to war, whether they're going to war themselves or not, but they support people going to war. G and gosh can be interpreted, I think, kind of like in the same way as emotional responses, like, oh gee, oh gosh, right? That I think he means it in that way. Gory is archaic, and it's also another word for God. So it's like if someone were to say, oh, by God, man, or something, by gory, that's the phrasing there. And I think understanding these words will help you better understand Cummings' text. Also, gum, right? He says by gum, could be another G or gosh style, but it's what's also really interesting here is the structure in which he organizes these words. So first he uses gory, which is in line number 6. Thy sons acclaim your glorious name by gory. So he's saying by God. So specifically referring to God in that line. And then he talks about the supporters, and then sort of these other ways in which we could say by God, by G, by gosh, right? A lot of people will replace gosh with God or something like that for respectful purposes. And then we have by gum, which is really interesting. The one that I thought that was the most interesting. And gum, right? Chewing gum, something sticky, but also we can use the word gum to talk about machinery and to say, well, like it got clogged or it gummed up, right? A gum is like a verb to clog up a mechanism and prevent it from working, which I think is really, really interesting in terms of this poem. I mean, it almost suggests that Cummings is saying that there's something not working in America, that this philosophy that let's go to war, let's be heroes, let's be these glorious men that support our nation faithfully, unwaveringly, unquestioningly, that there's a problem with this, there's a clog in this machinery or in this mechanism. So really just digging into the definitions of these words, I think gives us a perspective that you guys are all going for, like you're going in this direction, but the language is even further there that you might not realize. So I wanted to talk about that. And then I thought this final line was really interesting. You know, he spoke, period, and drank rapidly a glass of water. One, why does he spoke its own sentence? Some of you talked about him like ranting, and so I think it's curious that Cummings doesn't say he ranted, he spoke. So I almost wonder if Cummings is saying this is a rant, but it's a very thoughtful one. He isn't like fast. The poem reads rapidly, but it's not rapid speech like someone who's a little bit loony would say, who doesn't know what they're talking about. It's purposeful. I think that's the meaning behind the final line. And then also what's really interesting to me, which is relevant or not, he drank a glass of water. He drank rapidly, so it suggests thirst, which I think parallels this notion that there is this thirst for something else to quench, like maybe without the water that we're dying. But then also he drank rapidly. He's not drinking rum or whiskey. It's water, and water has this, I guess, connotation of being pure and of cleansing the body, or if it's raining in a movie or something, that suggests that some change is coming. So I think that if you really dug into even further, like why he picks this liquid of all the things for this guy to be drinking, it's water. I think that there's something there. So things to think about, and I liked all of your other ideas, with Pound's, Ezra Pound's text, and William Carlos Williams, who I like to Elsie, but The Red Wheelbarrow is better, so go read that. And then, of course, with Langston Hughes, which we'll read. I think you guys read it this week, Poem for English B, which is so good. We'll talk about that. So these are the things I wanted to highlight, and email me if you guys have any questions, but you did a really good job with the discussion board this week. So kudos, be thinking about your essay, and let me know if you need me.